Hello, everyone. It is Monday. I remain a tiny potato. I still believe in you. And on Wednesday, I think that you will do the thing. I just want to mention it as many times as possible that coming up on Wednesday is our second long distance exam. That is exam number 4 for this class. It will be just like the last one, which is just like the ones before 50 questions. 25 out of each of the chapters that we've covered, 12 and 13. And please take a look on the Scholar page or in your email for the study guides that I have sent you to get you prepared for this test. Short lecture today. It is going to be wrapping up a little bit about the evaluation of therapy and the nature of the therapeutic relationship itself. So I'm going to start with this idea. It is relatively easy when you are in a very data-driven, strict, easy to mark down, easy to collect data scenario like behavioral therapy to get an idea about how often a behavior is occurring, what its rate is, when did it start, when has it ended. Um, because you're usually dealing with very strict definitions. One way, by the way, to make sure that you have a therapeutic intervention in a behavioral setting that is working is this thing called multiple baselines. I like multiple baselines because they're a pretty good example of probability in terms of establishing something that's fairly complex in a fairly clear way. Multiple baseline means this. If you have an effective intervention, or if you have an intervention that you think is effective, if you implement it once and you see an improvement in the behavior that you're trying to reinforce or you're trying to reward, that might be evidence that your intervention was effective. But there are any number of other things that might have happened at the same time that you did your intervention, which is the kid could have gone on a new medication. They could have had a change at home. They could have just matured. They could have had a new attitude. They could have something in their life that was bothering them could have stopped or ended. Uh, any number of things. They could have had a change of teacher. Could be the issue. With multiple baselines, what you get to do is initiate your behavioral program with one problem or in one setting, and then see it work. But then, in a different setting or for a different problem, you wait a little while, initiate your behavioral program, and see what effect it has. And then you wait a little while and initiate that same program in a different setting for a different problem and see what effect it has. If that behavioral program seems to be the difference between in this case on the slide, a low rate of behavior and a high rate of a desirable behavior, then you've either got an effective behavioral program or one hell of a coincidence that that improvement seemed to happen only after in 3 different places you introduced your program. So that's why it's called multiple baseline. In this example, reading class, math class, and science class were each their own baselines for behavior. And when you came in and did your intervention, that behavior increased at 3 different times, responding to your intervention in 3 different areas. Now, here's the thing. In evaluating therapy in general, not just the very data-driven behavioral therapy, it's a lot more difficult than that. Here's what it looks like when we kind of take a look at psychotherapy in general, a whole bunch of different problems in general, and the population in general. The story that emerges, the overall story of therapy from counselors, from professional psychologists, from LCSWs, from qualified mental health professionals is this: it works. What that means is, while it is certainly the case that someone who is in a state of anxiety or depression or other mental disorder that is causing them to feel bad enough to seek help, it certainly is the case that after a period of time, with or without help, most of those people will spontaneously feel at least a little bit better over time. Not all of them, some of them will feel significantly worse over time. But there is a tendency to return to your baseline and feel a little better. However, if someone successfully seeks the help of a therapist in basically any modality, in any uh, range with any amount of time in a group, individual, with someone who has a PhD to a master's. There is a measurable increase in their improvement. So, improvement will tend to be more likely, longer lasting, and better for the group of people who manage to connect with someone who is doing therapy. So, for those of you who love hearing about statistics and curves, this is a distribution of people who seek therapy but are not able to acquire it. And so the average untreated person after a period of time will be showing some improvement, um, but not as much as the people who are over here on this curve with the green. That is the average for the person who was able to get therapy. So the difference between these two peaks is the average amount of help that therapy is doing for people who are able to acquire it. This 80% of untreated persons shading here says that basically, if you are an average person who has managed to acquire the services of a therapist, you will be doing better than 80% of the people who did not get a therapist. So that is kind of good news for the industry of therapy. It seems to be effective over a wide range of problems with a wide range of interventions and a wide range of different kinds of therapists, which leads to the desire for the therapeutic community to engage in what is known as evidence-based practice. The medical community is deeply into this. The medical community will track the effectiveness and symptom reduction for a new medication, for a combination of medications, for uh, surgical procedures, and they will just publish these constantly in journals that medical doctors, to one degree or another, will try to keep up with. Psychotherapists would like to have the same tradition, would like to do the same thing. And so evidence-based practice is something that the field has been pursuing. They are looking for what are known as ESTs, empirically supported therapies. Now, here's the thing. An empirically supported therapy is something that can't just show an effect that is statistically significant over an entire population with a huge group of people, even if the effect is very, very small. It has to show what is known as clinical significance. Clinical significance is something that is meaningful and observable and felt by an individual person that would make the difference between getting that empirically supported therapy and getting some other therapy or no therapy at all. So a person who knows that they have woken up feeling better after a great night of sleep has felt clinical significance in the change in the difference of their sleep time. This over here, on the other hand, is an illustration of a statistical significance. These are university students under one curve and the national average in another curve. And while it might be the case that with a large enough sample, this very tiny difference of about 5 minutes in sleep between university and national sleep rates might be something that is statistically significant, as it is a real difference at the individual level. A university student and a person from the regular population are not really going to be meaningfully distinguishable in how much sleep they get or how much different they feel based on how much sleep they get, even if their entire groups, when put together in a statistical analysis, have a statistically significant difference. So that raises the bar a little bit. We are looking for observable differences at the individual level. Now, what is it that makes that difference observable at the individual level? Well, it turns out that the story on the last slide about people getting better if they have therapy, no matter what kind of therapist or what kind of problem, tends to be the same story for every form of therapy that is commonly practiced. So this whole chapter we've been going over behavioral, cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, rational emotive behavior therapy, Gestalt therapy, all these different modes of therapy. Here's a weird thing. No matter what theoretical orientation your therapist might have, the effect of going to see them to work on a problem is relatively indistinguishable. What the heck is going on? There are only a couple of therapies that don't share strong or moderately strong support for their intervention, at least as according to the studies that have been shown in the book. These outliers in lacking evidence to support them are eye movement desensitization therapy, where you're supposed to move your eyes back and forth while you remember a trauma, and that's supposed to help with your trauma, or a short-term psychoanalysis for a specific phobia. Those are the only two things that seem to not work quite as well. Everything else is kind of in the strong support for effectiveness category, which leads to, if you're thinking about this scientifically, a little bit of a conundrum. Can all of these theorists who are backing the effectiveness of their therapy with an explanation about how human beings work, what makes them tick, what causes their problem, what needs to be fixed, can they all be right? And the answer is no. It is impossible for all of the theoretical orientations that drive the different therapies to all be empirically correct. This, by the way, is one of the things that drove me absolutely insane when I was a therapist. People spoke in the therapeutic community very confidently about the idea that they understood what was the impact of their client's past, of their client's learning history, of their client's childhood on the problems that their clients were having at the moment. They seemed to be speaking as if they were experts on exactly what was going on in their client's life, because their theoretical orientation said their object relations with their mothers were determining the kind of relationships that they had now, and their inferiority was being played out in an aggressive posture with their coworkers. All these things. And I just wanted to scream at them, how do you know? That's a pretty bold statement to make up about somebody else's life. Do you have any evidence for that? And they didn't have evidence. They only had confidence. All right. At the same time that I was incredibly frustrated by the kind of lack of scientific or empirical rigor among the people who were doing therapy, I could not help but be impressed at the way in which my colleagues were able to connect and help people to feel better. That was undeniable. Their clients were being maintained in their functioning, their clients were feeling better, their clients were enjoying their sessions. These people were doing good in the world. They were being effective. And so, what the heck is going on? Well, it turns out that effective therapy, or being an effective therapist, does not rely on having a true theory about how people work or how people function. That was both one of the biggest revelations and one of the biggest disappointments that I had when getting a master's degree in counseling. I kind of figured that if you were going to be a people mechanic, that you would have to understand people, such as the same way that if you were going to fix cars, you would have to know how cars work, right? If you were going to help fix people, you were going to have to understand how people work, right? No. It turns out it's not necessary to understand how people work in order to be a helper in the counseling or therapeutic professions. So what is it that's going on? How is it that all of these different therapies could be giving basically the same outcome, if not all of them can be right? And the best answer we have so far to that is this idea called common factors. Common factors are best exemplified by what the Rogerian client-centered therapist is doing. The client-centered therapist, the stuff that the humanists and Carl Rogers did, was as stripped down as possible when it came to the activity and the feedback and the imposition of the thinking of the therapist. That is a effective therapy. It's as effective as psychoanalysis. It's effective as cognitive behavioral. It's as effective as anything else. So looking for what's going on in that stripped down version of therapy is where we will find the factors that are common to all the therapies, which seem to be driving what it is that is making them all equally effective. Somebody on the writing team of New Girl clearly had a background in learning about about client-centered humanist Rogerian therapy, and did a little bit of a spoof on it, but it is brilliant. All of the elements necessary for the common factors of effectiveness in psychotherapy are present in this clip. And you'll notice the therapist says nothing.
Please don't do that, sir. Please, I would love to sit by myself right now. There's something real creepy about you, pal. You want to get weird? Let's get weird. You got a nice face. An anger problem? Living with them? Are you kidding me? Oh, it's frustrating. It's like, just get a job. I like your hat. I like how it's not a team or a logo, it's just blue. Would you rather be covered in fish scales or feathers? Scales? Why, you weirdo? You want to see me jump really high? I'm afraid of dying, man. Who am I? The enemy is in me. The enemy is the inner me. Do you understand a word I'm saying? You just nodded everything. I need to change, and you showed me that. I have an anger problem. Thank you. Can I get a hug?
Okay, so what are these common factors? Well, you'll notice in the clip that I'm going to call him the therapist, gave nothing but positive regard. He gave time, he gave attention, he was there, and he was smiling. Everything else that happened in therapy came from Jake Johansson. He made his own analysis. He made his own understanding. He felt understood. He felt heard, even though it would have been nice to have some empathy statements from the therapist. But nevertheless, he came to his own conclusions. He came to his own understanding. And all that was necessary was that he joined therapeutically with the person who seemed to see, understand, trust, and believe in him. All right. So here are the common factors. Support seems to be the biggest one. If you have someone whose job it is to be there to support you, that is a unique experience for a human being, especially in modern times. Okay? You have someone whose existence during the time that you have bought minutes for a session, whose entire existence is about you. A therapist is not going to be answering the phone. A therapist is not going to be receiving text. A therapist is not going to be cutting you off. A therapist is not going to be waiting for their turn to reciprocally exchange a conversation. Okay. And that's what the clip here is about from, of all movies, Fight Club. Talking about what it is that has made the experience of being in group therapy such a compelling and powerful thing for both of these characters to have been engaged in over the course of the last year. If you're not familiar with the movie, both of these characters have been showing up to group therapy sessions for diseases that they don't have, just to experience having someone listen to them and offer them support.
Oh God, why are you doing this?
It's cheaper than a movie and this free coffee.
No, look, this is important, okay? These are my groups. I've been coming here for over a year.
Why do you do it?
I don't know. When people think you're dying, man, they really, really listen to you instead of
just waiting for their turn to speak.
Yeah.
Okay. Other things that are important for therapy that are in the common factors are hope for improvement, that you will gain an explanation into what it is that is affecting you. You will gain a sense of control, even if there is nothing to it. You are essentially getting, in a relationship sense, a big old placebo. But as we've talked about, in the very first lecture, there's no reason to think that a placebo is ineffective. In fact, that's why it is a placebo, because it is effective. Okay? So even if your explanation is wrong, even if you don't actually have control of the thing that you think you might have control of through talking to somebody in therapy, the sense that you do can affect your mood, can affect your symptoms, and can be helpful. So the idea that you've got a handle on it, that you have constructed a narrative, a fantasy with someone else that is joining with you, can in and of itself be a thing that helps you to get along, feel better, function better, and therefore, even if it was all bull, like Freud was all bull, it can still be an effective way of helping a person get through their life. For these reasons, you will find most of the time, if somebody is listing their therapeutic orientation as a therapist, that they're going to call themselves eclectic. What that is basically a recognition that there are techniques and strategies that are good to borrow from any number of different therapeutic orientations. And if it seems to fit the situation, a therapist will have no hesitation to just reach out, grab it, and use it. If you want to use positive reinforcement, great, that's good. You want to use thought stopping or another cognitive strategy, fine, let's go ahead and do it. You want to talk about your childhood and have a go at what happened with your parents and how you related to them, great. Object relations, we'll do that. That is the eclectic therapist. If it seems to be something that the client wants to do, fine, no problem, let's go with that, because this is not about what the therapist believes. It is about what the client believes is going to be helpful. And if the client believes it's going to be helpful, then in all likelihood, it is. In training as a therapist for myself, I had a client. It was kind of a practice client. It was in a clinic that was like $1 per session for people in the community to come in. But I had a client who really wanted to do hypnosis. She wanted to do hypnotize. And all I could do as a not very effective beginning therapist was say, the research doesn't really support the idea that hypnosis is real. Well, I really needed to shut the hell up. And the reason is because this client wanted to be hypnotized. She thought that it was going to help. And so it really would have been more effective of me to say, well, what do you think that might look like? Let's give it a shot. How did that feel? Okay. Again, I've given you now probably 13, 14 reasons why I wasn't the best therapist, but at least I understand now, right? Okay. That all being said, therapy is effective. What kind of therapies are most effective? Well, I said that common therapies as practiced are the ones that are effective. That is to say, the ones that are in bounds. There are some boundaries about what it is that makes a therapeutic relationship appropriate and legal, and things that will potentially be harmful or outside the bounds of good therapy. First and most important is a lot of the therapeutic relationships that people have with each other become very emotional, very intense, and there's a lot of sharing, there is a lot of deep connection, and that can often be the groundwork for what in other circumstances would have been some sort of a mutual attraction. It is up to therapists to make sure that the boundary between themselves and their clients in terms of a romantic relationship is firmly established and not fuzzy. The APA says, here's some guidelines to help keep you in line. You are forbidden from having any kind of sexual relationship or contact with a client up to 2 years after you have terminated therapy with them. Even after that, it is absolutely essential that you make clear that there is no manipulation, that there's no coercion, and that this is in no way going to be detrimental or harmful to your client. There are some places where it's illegal to ever have a sexual relationship with someone that you had a therapeutic relationship with. Confidentiality is another aspect that tends to be a part of an ethical and legal consideration for therapists. It also marks the line between therapy for entertainment and therapy for help. When I went to my master's program, my mom, who's a wonderful and helpful person who's always taken a very big interest in my goals and my life and my brother's as well, was like, you're going to hear a lot about this wonderful new mode of doing therapy that I just think is really effective, and you're going to love it. It's this Dr. Laura, and she was talking about Dr. Laura Schlesinger, who is basically what do I want to say? A radio host, a shock jock, not even a counselor, not even a therapist. She's a physiologist. She does have a medical degree. But her radio show is basically getting people with problems, berating them on the air for the entertainment of the other people who are listening, cutting them off with some advice, and then basically just pretending like, without any follow-up, that person's life must have gotten better because they had talked to Dr. Laura. Other people who do this kind of thing are Dr. Phil, Dr. Drew. These are basically advice columnists in real time. And the thing they have in common, which is always a red flag, is that if anybody goes by doctor in their first name, if I haven't mentioned this before, is somebody that you should really take with a huge grain of salt. But those relationships are not therapeutic. They are not joining. They are not caring. They are not for the client. They are for the therapist and their show, which means that they're looking to please their audience. So confidentiality is one of those things that really makes up a legitimate therapeutic relationship. Confidentiality is important. A client kind of needs to know that what they tell you in the session is something that will not come around to bite them again. They need to be free to say what they want without being too careful about their words, so that they can get a new perspective, change their mind later, without having to deal with any of the hurt or pain that their words or their opinions might have caused earlier on. The entire point of therapy is change. So if somebody is saying something different a few weeks or months after they started therapy from when they began, that progress needs to be recognized and celebrated. We definitely don't want to be punishing people for where they started in a process of change. And so therapist-client confidentiality is about as ironclad as it is for that between between a lawyer and a client. Not quite as ironclad as it is between a priest or a religious figure and somebody who is doing confession or counseling within a religious context. But it does have its limits. And these limits are actually very important for therapists to go over with their clients before they get started. We don't, as therapists, want to give people the impression that their confidentiality is absolute. So on the first session, people need to be told that if they say something that makes the therapist concerned that they are an imminent threat to themselves or an imminent threat to somebody else, that therapist will have to break confidentiality and assure the safety of the people involved. I had someone who was very upset with me when I was working as a therapist, as a counselor, over the phone. And he had an argument with his family. He was driving around town. He had made several phone calls into our treatment center. It was getting late at night. I was now the only one in the call center because call volume was usually fairly light. But given the threats of violence that he had made to his family, it was, with consultation, determined that this person's statements could not be kept confidential, and that knowing his address, we were able to call the police and have them come over to his house for protection. This upset him very much because he didn't want police to be there. He didn't want anybody else involved. He was losing control of the situation. And so he was quite upset at the people at the counseling, the hotline, for having divulged that information. But it was a very clear call. It was not, we were not able to maintain confidentiality when he was driving around in his vehicle with guns. And we even knew what kind of guns he had. He had a shotgun and he had a .45. So at one point on the phone with me, pulled over somewhere in his vehicle, he he said, "You know what this is?" And I heard a pop over the phone. And I said, "Well, yeah, it sounds like a .45. He's like, "You're damn right it is." And to this day, I don't know, was I messing with him in a way that was inappropriate? I don't think anybody can really guess the caliber of a gun by hearing the gunshot over the phone. But I pretended like I could because I already knew what kind of guns he had. So fun stories from the days of counseling and therapy, and then I quit. All right. Other things that will make a therapist break confidentiality are if somebody mentions that they have knowledge of physical or sexual abuse of a child or an elder, a person who cannot be responsible for their own selves. This actually happened not too long ago when I was the client of someone that we've been going in to talk about family and other issues with an LCSW, and we mentioned something that concerned him enough on behalf of the experience of one of our daughter's friends, that he just said, okay, I need to get the details that you have, and you just call it in. The therapist is obligated to at least let the authorities know. The therapist is not obligated to follow up, investigate, determine whether it was true, determine whether a person needs to be removed from the home. They are merely obligated under those circumstances to make a report and put the information in the hands of people who may need to follow up with it to assure the safety of a child. Okay, that's why as a therapist, it's a little bit easier of a call. You are not making a child be removed from the home. You are not making a call about that child's future or intervention. You are merely giving information to the people who do make those calls. Sometimes they make the right call. Horror stories out there are that they don't. But once you put that information in the hands of the appropriate people, that is the extent of the obligation of a therapist. Other rare instances, a therapist does in fact have the right to defend themselves if they are taken to court by a client. They can pull their records, they can give their own testimony about the situation. And if a client is using a therapist testimony as a part of their defense in court, that therapist, of course, is allowed to tell the truth about that client's mental state. All right. That gets us where we were going. That's the end of chapter 13. It was so short that I didn't want to put a comedy break in the middle. But as long as you're still here with me, one more from Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, because how could we not? It's chapter 13. This is with Bob Odenkirk. You know Bob Odenkirk. Bob Odenkirk is Saul from Better Call Saul and from Breaking Bad. He's been on all sorts of sketch comedy shows. And he's in the Amazon original, I think, Undone, or Netflix or Hulu, I can't remember. Fantastic actor, but he started out as a comedy writer and comedian. Here he is on Dr. Katz.
You know, I got into these computer games lately.
Right.
Because I got this computer and I've been playing it, you know, like a maniac.
Yeah.
Computer games are dangerous, I think, because they do bring out the violence in you. And for me, I just don't like feeling that upset. I don't want to kill anybody. And when you go in, I had this one video game that was like a dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in this game, all I wanted was a button I could press where all these guards and goblins would just put down their guns and sit there and be mellow. And then I could just walk through and say hi to them. Hey, you guys, what's going on? Not much. You guys guarding the blue key? Yeah, just guarding it. Okay, well, take care. Have a good day. Yeah, you too. Keep going. All right. That would be fun for me instead of hurting. No more hurting. Dr. Katz, here's something I want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just thankful that there's no such thing as magic.
Huh.
And that people like David Copperfield and Doug Henning don't have any real powers, because then we'd all have to work for them. What are you doing, man? Oh, I'm in David Copperfield's army. How about you? I'm working for Doug Henning right now. So what are you guys up to? Well, mostly we're just building statues to David and how great he is. Yeah, how's it going? Oh, it sucks. He's such a jerk. I'm sorry, he's great. David's great. He's not a nerd. He's not a loser. Doctor, I was at a wedding in Indiana yesterday, and my Uncle Joe talked to me for about 45 minutes, and I didn't really get a chance to respond during it, so I was wondering if I could just take a second here and respond to him.
Sure, I guess so.
Okay, so... Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. I don't care about your boat. I don't care. I don't care. Well, who's Chuck? Who's Chuck? You just started talking about Chuck, but you never told me who he was. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. God, I want to squeeze your nose.
I'm sorry, Bob. You know what the music means. Our time is up.
All right, hope you enjoyed that. Last reminder, Tuesday, 2:00 Eastern, be online, be in the thing, in the scholar click that says take tests here. I will also be there on Blackboard Connect in case you're in any technical or other problems to fix them right away. See you then. We will be back on Friday with the first talk about what is it? Oh yeah, social psychology. Always very fascinating. Take care. See you on Wednesday.